For the 9th 80, take 1.
At the turn of the century, 250,000 Londoners travelled to Kent and Sussex to pick hops. It was treated as a working holiday, away from the grime and monotony of industrial life. They used to arrive by train, hoppers' specials, and during the picking month of September, the countryside was transformed. Trolleys laden with provisions were carted to the hop gardens for picking to begin. It was a family affair with a mix of generations that created a festive mood. At that time, the method of harvesting hadn't changed since hops were introduced into Britain in Roman times. The flowers, or hops, of the climbing plant, which is incidentally related to cannabis, contain a bittering agent that has been used for 500 years to provide beer with its distinctive flavour. During the 16th century, hops began to be grown on a commercial scale, and the acreage peaked in Victorian times. It was during this period that oast houses became such a feature of the Kent landscape. The white cowls on the tops of the oast houses speckle the countryside of the hop-growing counties. They move with the wind and help to prevent downdrafts when the hops are dried in the kilns within the oasts. Some brewers have their own hop farms, but the majority of hops are grown and dried by farmers on a much smaller scale, but rarely as small as Clock House Farm. It's the only one surviving that still relies on East Enders to pick by hand rather than machine. About 30 families spend all day long for 3 weeks picking the 10 acres of hops from the bines. Weekends are reserved for visiting friends and neighbours wishing to share in the nostalgia for the old days. Many of the pickers have been coming here since they were young children. Mrs. Harbert is one.
We like it so much. And the holidays.
See old friends and you know, people you knew them years ago, and it was quite comradely then, you know.
Up, ready!
Peter Day, the son of the farmer, is the measurer. Twice a day, he removes the hops from each of the bins scattered about the garden. The number of bushels picked is carefully recorded by a bookie. Payment is made at the end of the harvest. The money earned rarely covers the cost of the 3 weeks away from home and is not too much of an incentive to work particularly fast. 50 years ago, it was a different matter.
When I think of my poor old mother, in the old days where we used to work, we did work then. Work harder than what we do now.
The children were expected to work hard?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, the children had to have their half a bins. Half a bins the children used to have, didn't they? Yeah. All half a bins.
and we used to go down to the pub for a drink. When you went in the pub, you know, for your drinks, you had to put a deposit on the glass, because being EastEnders, they were frightened you were going to steal everything. When we went down the ball there, the locals had their own bar. We weren't allowed to go in their bar.
I don't think they liked us very much.
No, more or less take over, especially down the pub of a night time. You know, used to just invade the place, like, you know, where they'd have, say, 30 customers a night. When we all come down here, you know, you got 300 or 400 all packed outside and sitting down outside drinking as well, you know.
Because it's not like that.
You know, there's to say it's not like that now.
Once in the 10-bushel sacks, called pokes, the farmer takes over. The pokes are hoisted to the top floor of the oast for loading in the kiln. It's here that the hops are dried by having hot air blown through them. The living conditions have changed little, at least outwardly, over the last 100 years. The sleeping arrangements, even 30 years ago, were surprisingly basic.
Well, rather primitive, really. They used to collect these big bundles of wood, which are called faggots, and put them as a base, and then there'd be a huge board, like planks of wood all joined together. Lay that on the top, and then these bines were dried and all chopped up, and put that on next, and then a big mound of straw. And it was really comfortable. It was like a nest, wasn't it? Yeah. When looking back, really, I mean, when the visitors come down, it was like one sardines, top and bottom and all. And all,
You only had the one bed for the whole pub.
yeah, the whole one bed for everybody.
Beds have since improved, but the antique huts still serve most, although the less stoic have retreated to the comfort of modern caravans. Evenings round the fire, however, still round off the day. To the casual observer, what distinguishes modern harvesting techniques from the systems they supersede is the lack of people. Now, a team of 23, with a little help from tractors and machines, can pick 60 acres of hops in just 3 weeks. Students provide the extra labour required, and here at Hole Park Farms at Rolvenden in Kent, most come from Scotland. The bines are cut about 2 feet from the ground, slashed away from their wire supports and dropped into small trailers. Once the trailers are full, the garden gangs can move on to the next, and 6 tractors and trailers are used to service them. The hops, still attached to the bines, are then carted back to a static, covered picking machine at the farmyard. The gangs are permanently based in the gardens, and the students seem quick to learn their skills.
We always feel we're lucky. We have a hostel. We have for several years had students now from Scottish universities, and this year from Aberdeen and Edinburgh. They live together in a small community. We've, I believe, 10 or 9 or 10 in the hostel at the moment. And they know they're coming to work, and they work well for this period of 3 to 4 weeks before they go back. They come down to the Kent sunshine, of course, different type of countryside. And we keep them pretty well occupied, and they work well, particularly as there are so few of our own home-based men working with them. In this garden, for instance, there's just one man that looks after the whole of the students here.
Gordon Stonham is the farm manager at Hole Park and looks after 1,800 acres. The hops are just one of the many enterprises on the estate, but require constant supervision at every stage of their growth. Pests and disease are the biggest headache, and the greatest scourge of all is wilt. During the last 25 years, verticillium wilt has caused havoc to Britain's hops. Strong plants, which can often grow up to 20 feet in length, are converted to a withered strand by the fungi. But many gardens have already been replanted with wilt-tolerant varieties.
In this part of the world, in Kent and Sussex, probably something like 40–50% of the area is in with wilt-tolerant varieties. Perhaps that's modest, maybe a little more than that even.
You've got a wilted plant behind you. Is that the typical symptoms?
Well, it is. It's very dead, and sadly that's what happens with wilted hops, especially July, August of the crop year. Usually the hops are perhaps more further developed than this one, which seems to be rather weak. But basically, the sad thing is that wilt appears in July and August, just when the crop is towards its extent of development.
Farmers are naturally looking for varieties that can withstand disease and also produce high levels of the bittering agent required by brewers. Scientists have isolated a particular compound called alpha acid, which is produced by small glands in the hop cones.
Well, if I break these hops open, the base of the petals, you will see this yellowness, and the degree of yellowness is a rough measure of the bittering potential, but it is in fact carried out by analytical procedures.
Does this mean that over the years the breeding program has been geared to increasing the alpha acid content of hops?
Oh yes, indeed. We now have a very different distribution or complement of varieties compared to post-war, say, when 80% of our hops were variety Fuggle with an alpha of about something under 4%, and Goldings were 20% of our crop with an alpha of about 4.5. And now we're talking about growing varieties with a minimum of 7% of alpha acid, and as high as we target now, 10.5%, and maybe a new variety coming into production or will be planted this winter, which may be as high as 11–12%.
25 seconds, Farming Outlook Part 2, FO 8039-1, recording date 25/9/80, take 1.
Tractors and trailers are only part of the modern hop harvesting scene. The bines, laden with hops and still attached to the strings that have been supporting them, are delivered from the gardens to the enormous picking machine. Overhead conveyors, which pass the bines between banks of wire flails fitted to revolving cylinders, have taken over where the East Enders have left off. Since the 1950s, picking machines like this have transformed what used to be rather casual, labour-intensive work into a high-speed production line. The few people who are employed remove any bines that might have escaped the attention of the machine and keep a watch out for blockages. The presence of too many leaves, as in hand picking, can cause severe problems when the hops are dry. Special care is therefore taken to remove any foliage before the hops are transported to the kiln. Here at Holden Place, 2 of the 3 kilns are the traditional circular shape, and they're loaded about 4 feet deep with hops. Drying takes between 7 and 10 hours, depending on the moisture of the hops going in. Because there are 3 kilns altogether, the drying team works round the clock, snatching sleep in the oast house when they can.
Hops are loaded in the morning and again in the afternoon, and the afternoon hops perhaps aren't ready to be taken off until early hours of the morning. But all the while they've got to be on hand to turn the hops off, of course, at the vital point when they're ready.
Once the kiln is full, the oil burners are turned on. Although the fuel has changed over the years, the drying principles have not. Hot air rises up through the floor of the kiln and removes moisture out through the side vents and cowl. When the hops are dried to about 8% moisture, they're left to cool before being judged ready for compressing. Scuppets are used to push the hops down a hole in the cooling floor into large cylindrically shaped bales known as pockets, hanging from the ceiling below. To prevent deterioration, it's essential that hops are compressed firmly. Correct judgment from the dryers is required at almost every stage of the process, and their skills have always been held in high esteem. Sophisticated controls and the demise of charcoal and coal fires has, however, removed some of the art from the science.
Well, yes, in the older days, the hop dryer was the king of his castle. No one was allowed in an oast, and it was all mystified witchcraft, the art of hop drying. But it has been technically improved, of course, and today we find that we can do it with science, and although the point of taking them off and judging to know the actual water content of the hop is a vital point.
In a good year, over 500 pockets will be filled, each one being worth about £170. Throughout the autumn, the pockets are transported to the Hop Marketing Board's warehouses. Pockets from different farms and of different varieties are carefully stored, but the board's general manager, Geoffrey Broom, thinks that the sheer profusion of the different types of hops is a little excessive.
From my point of view, I would have preferred less than 14 varieties, but I realise that some growers on certain land need this or that variety to make their picking program work, you know, early, middle and late varieties, and that's why we have these 14 varieties. But really, we could do with a smaller number.
What about variety for beer consumers? Presumably it's in their interest to have a range of different hops that are available?
Yes, I think that's so, but I still think that that range could be achieved with less than 14 varieties.
Because of the high value of the crop, a great deal of effort is made to determine the quality of the hops presented. Overheating due to excess moisture can sometimes result in disaster. Samples are taken for grading, and because this is carried out primarily by visual appearance, each block is prepared in precisely the same way. The extent to which all parties go to achieve absolute fairness is quite remarkable.
We'll leave that for the moment.
Leave that for the moment, come back to it. Try that one there.
The samples are displayed in front of a panel of three: a grower's representative, a brewer's representative, and the man in the middle, Alan Unwin of the Hops Board. Their aim is to agree a grading. The grower's man, or hop factor, provides the specially lit showroom. The merchant obviously has his clients', the brewers', interests at heart, but generally speaking, agreement is reached and dispute is rare. Once graded and valued, the hops reach their final destination, the breweries. Most hops are further processed in the form of pellets or extract, but some traditional breweries still use whole hops. Here at Theakston's in Yorkshire, a blend of two varieties is added to the wort and boiled in the copper. After months of painstaking care on the farms, the hop flowers spend less than 2 hours actually flavouring the beer. A single ounce of hops is sufficient to bitter 4 to 5 gallons of beer, and so despite the fact that we get through 12,000 million pints a year, the actual quantity of hops used is quite small. After boiling the hops and wort together, the liquid is run out into the hop back and allowed to cool. At every stage of the process, the brewer's role is all important. One of the problems of using hops containing higher levels of the bittering agent is that less hops are required. When it comes to filtering the wort through the perforated floor of the hop back, insufficient hops are present to achieve a satisfactory filtration. As a result, breweries like this still tend to use traditional varieties like Fuggle to provide the bulk. The spent hops are collected and in great demand from local gardeners. Because much of the aroma provided by the hops in the early stages is lost during subsequent fermentation, dry hops are reintroduced to top up the flavour immediately before casking. Over 30 million pints of beer are drunk every day in Britain, and consumption is increasing each year. All the hops produced by British farmers end up in beer, and as long as no one comes up with a synthetic alternative, the expensive business of growing hops is likely to be with us for a long time. For beer connoisseurs, that can only be good news.